I want to do a sketch note after that, so I have all the contents, but if I can have the really some of pieces of feedback from the and conversation
Yep, I
from
will
the
share the
people.
chat. Yep, I'll share all the recordings and the chat with you.
Good, thank you.
Blossom, do you want to let people in or we wait till 12 o'clock?
I guess that would be up to you all.
So remember, Jill, whenever we think we're speaking, uh, well, we have to speak slowly, both of us.
Yes. Yes.
That's our lesson.
Speak slow.
All right, I'm going to start admitting people.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, do we begin or do we wait for a couple of minutes more?
Why don't we give it like another minute or two? Does
Yeah.
that sound good?
Good morning or afternoon, everybody, from wherever you're joining us. Welcome to the Idaho Partners for Good Breakthrough Series on branding resiliency into your organization. We are so thankful you chose to learn with us today. Today's workshop is the fifth in the series that highlights our impact team's expertise. These are experts from a wide range of backgrounds, professions, and lived experience, and you can hire them to give your business a competitive advantage. Before we dive in today, I will take a minute to share our upcoming workshops. In May, we have two workshops coming up. Sienna George from Oliver Russell is going to join us to talk about social enterprise spectrum. And we are bringing back on demand our February workshop on unconscious bias in the workplace. So if you missed this in February, this is a great opportunity to be part of this workshop again. And you can sign up for all these events at the URL you see on the screen. And I'm also going to share this later in the chat box. And you can also stay connected with us to be on the loop on all our events and what else we are up to. Sign up for our newsletter. Email us at info@idahopartnersforgood.org and stay connected with us on LinkedIn and Facebook. And now coming back to today's workshop, we have Lorraine Loury and Gill Hill with us today. I will take a few minutes to introduce them. Lorraine Loury is a change management and communications consultant with more than a decade of international experience in facilitating change. Her superpowers are onboarding employees to make them agents of change, encouraging cooperation to let collective intelligence bud, and facilitating group discussions to lead them to co-designed solutions. Lorraine supports her clients in driving their transformation projects through commitment and cooperation, giving meaning to the change, writing the story, and building a tailor-made change management plan. Lorraine is also a storyteller and sketchnoting and doodling addict who loves to turn anything she reads or hears into a visual recap. She believes a visual one-pager of a conference or a mission statement definitely helps focus on key ideas and makes them understandable and memorable. Welcome, Lorraine.
Thank you, Levania.
Jill Hill is a brand mixologist and content writer. She loves to absorb people's stories and then communicate them on to others, which is why she first became an attorney in Scotland. Her superpowers are learning about her client's business, understanding what they do, and translating that into something that is compelling and engaging to their ideal client. With her law skills, she is able to analyze content and take both a high level and detailed approach. Jill helps organizations analyze their brand messages and voice so they have a consistent, professional, and identifiable sound across all their business content that connects with their ideal audience. She has two rambunctious boys and loves nothing more than to get outside hiking, biking, or skiing, or enjoy the great state of Idaho. Welcome, ladies, and we are so excited to have you today.
Thanks, Lavanya. So today we're going to be talking to you about branding resiliency into your organization, and in particular, the external and internal challenges of crisis and change communications. So Lavanya, if you could move the slide on one for us, that would be great. Okay, so we're going to go through just a few of how we've set the workshop up to start with, and then we'll get into the meat of it. So first of all, just a few definitions for you, because there's lots of big words in there, some of which some of you may have a great idea of what we're talking about, and others you might be a little fuzzy on. So we felt it was worth going through some of these definitions. So the first one that I wanted to talk about really is brand or branding. If you think about where branding comes from in the first place, it's using the cattle brand, branding your cattle. And if you think about how we did that, we were adding a logo onto something so that we understood what it was, so we can identify something that where it comes from. So we have all different types of branding we use nowadays, which includes logos, visually how things look, but it also includes what we say about our business and how we say it, how we sound. It includes the names of our products. It's all of the stories that we tell. It includes everything that gives people an impression of what our organization is. And so I would describe it as like the container for your organization. Branding is what everybody else sees of your organization. But if you think about why ranchers did that in the first place, it was because their cattle had value and they wanted to make sure they could identify what was theirs. It was on a particular type of land with a particularly luscious grass, and they looked after their cattle in a certain way. And as a result, they could charge more for that than other ranchers could. So the branding, the stamping, the container we use to identify, the point of all of that is to show the value that our brand has. And that's really fundamental. I think when we talk about resiliency, all resiliency is really is easily adapting to change and to something being different. And so if your container is molded around something that's inside it, around its values, then it will easily be flexible and move as you need it to. If the container is rigid and it doesn't really relate to what's inside, that's when we have a risk that it breaks, it cracks, and something goes wrong as the change happens. So for there to be resiliency in your business, we really want to connect what the value of your brand is and not just the external branding of it. And now I'm going to hand you over to Lorraine to explain the other definitions.
Lorraine, you're on mute.
Sorry. On the what is a change situation versus a crisis situations? So how I would describe a change situation with any change from A to B. So it needs to be planned, organized, supported in order to help your staff getting there, understanding the why. And today, more and more, it's more and more a day-to-day challenge because change is eventually the new normal. So that would be, yeah, any change you have to go from point A to B, and versus the crisis situation, with it's the same-ish, but it's not predictable. And even if it's not predictable, it can be prepared. And I would say it has to be prepared. And this is some of the things we're going to go deeper in today. Jill, it's your turn.
Okay, so yeah, we want this to be a workshop, which means we would really like it to be collaborative if you can. We would encourage you to go and get a notebook and a pen, or find some way to make some notes as you're going, because we're going to be asking you some questions. We're going to be giving you some examples, some descriptions of how to do this, and then we're going to be asking you to think about it. So you can add comments to the chat as you go, or you can raise your hand on Zoom if you would like to comment. If there's something that comes up as you're thinking about your business that you'd like to share, we would love to hear it. I think Lorraine and I both feel that examples are the best way to help describe how this really works in action. If you don't feel comfortable sharing exactly what has happened in your organization, in the chat where it says to everyone, you can change that to say to Lavanya, and she will read something out anonymously if you wish. So if you, or keep it to yourself and work on it for later, but we would love to hear any examples if you have them to share. And I think the most likely examples you're probably going to have are from COVID, because I think this last year has been a perfect example of both crisis and change happening. At the very beginning of COVID, we had a whole load of crisis management to deal with as our organizations had to turn things around overnight. But then over the course of this year, we've been in a change. We're still changing how things are working, how we're communicating with our internal staff, how we're communicating with our audience. And so it's quite likely that you will have some examples that come up because of what's happened in the past year. But I think if Lorraine and I know anything, it's that there will be more crisis and more change coming in your organization at some point in the future, whatever happens. So if COVID has been the wake-up call to get you to think about how you communicate during crises and changes, then use that to your benefit so that you're a little more prepared for what may happen in the future. We have a few examples from COVID time, and we also have some other examples as well. And so now I'm going to pass you back to Lorraine.
So the third point of our introduction is we want to focus on today how internal and external communications are related, and the hinges we can see between the two, and how powerful it can be to work really on it as a duo. Because you can easily think that any external project, which can be a business project, a marketing project, a partnership project, or anything, will at some point affect your staff. And on the other way, an internal project, a new organization, a process redesign will at some point resonate externally. So that's why we are convinced that consistency and alignment between internal and external communications is key. Which employee would like to hear about his company new business strategies through the news? Nobody, I think. And on the other way, whenever employees talk about your organization to the outside world, they become part of the external communication. So as you see, it's really, really closely related. And that's why we want to have this, to show you how important it is to have this umbrella that is consistent and really work hand in hand. And in order to have everybody on the same page and have the strategy as well as the brand, the voice, and the culture you have internally, all this really consistent. So we're going to start with our first part of the topic. Lavanya, you can go ahead. We're going to focus on how your people are your first ambassadors. So that's the first way to show how important is your first audience, which is your internal people, your staff. For this, we threw there three key ideas. The first one is, I like the parallel, I like the metaphor with the airplane security rules you have whenever you start a flight. Always put your own oxygen mask before trying to help others. And it's actually so true for communications. If you take care of your internal audience first, then all is going to go pretty smoothly. Because as I said right before, nobody wants to hear about something new in the company through the news or through any social media or I don't know what. You just want to put your internal audience first. The second point I would like to focus on is trust. It's clearly related to my first one, because it's one of the pillars to build trust, to put them first, right? But it's also transparency, be as transparent as possible, which means give the most vision, goals, milestones, successes, but also pain points that you have to that you have along the way. That doesn't mean to say everything, but that means to say all that can be shared and that can give people meaning, that can give them vision on where we want to go, how we want to go, and why are we doing that project, and the why is really crucial. Then you're going to get them on board. And the second thing is you can ask your internal people how they want to be involved, in your communications. They can be you can consider them as an audience, but at some point they can be kind of a channel too. It means that you, to get this communication shared with this audience, you're actually going to use, that's not the right term, but to use your internal people to get there. And that's a win-win situation. That's not negative. That's really a win-win situation. They are involved and you have, you reach your goals. And the third point I would like to focus on is really the collaborative solution. I'm a fervent supporter of everything which is collaborative. I'm really convinced that you get your people on board better if they first if they understand the why, and then if they contribute to the how. And so co-design with the staff any how part you can in order to get them energized and involved through workshop, focus group, or any brainstorm they could be part of, and actually accountable for the results of that. Then you turn them into actors of change. And again, it's really a win-win situation. And to end that part, I would just share a quote that I really like that you can see on the screen. It's that trust is the glue of life. It's the most essential ingredient in effective communication and the foundational principle that hold all relationships. I think it's a good summary of that part. I have a little example to illustrate that part. So a few years ago, when I was actually a consultant in France, one of my main clients was in the retail environment. We could compare it to Albertson. And I was working on an IT transformation program. And I got on board more to support them in the communications of that program. And to draw you the context, it was I don't know, maybe the third or fourth or fifth transformation they would have in this IT department. And we clearly had a trust issue. What would this one work? What is it different this time? Is it, it's a new manager, okay, but is it just its idea and we try to go ahead with a new, again, a new transformation, and we can't even see the effects of the previous one. And then the IT director and the board actually built a really innovative approach where the staff were the builders. That means that not only to execute the plan, they would really have a voice in the build part. As I said before, the board kind of framed the why, but the staff really would be involved and be accountable for the how. And so it was really in their hands. It was kind of a transformation factory in when they actually launched the program. More than 100 people were committed right after this first town hall. And among them, a group of 20 leaders were identified to lead the kind of the work zone. And they become these ambassadors I'm really talking about here. And then a 10-ish umbrella topic were identified with one leader responsible for each of them. And then all the governance around them would be related to this staff organization. Means like the leader would meet weekly to share with the group where they were on, what their group decided, and share the solutions they were about to implement. And unless there would be really something that was not relevant or anything, they would go ahead like this and just get everybody informed about what they were doing. And a lot of communications were made about around that. And it would be, so some of them would be really organized and kind of coming from the top, but we really worked also on having the staff and these leaders, ambassadors we identified, part of the communication and actively sharing their stuff without any people up there validating something. It was really collaborative. And actually a big part of the IT department got on board pretty easily. And in a few weeks, we could really see the effect of this collaborative and innovative approach. And these ambassadors became really the voice of the project internally in the IT department, but also what I would say externally, even if it's not the market, but the company was so big that externally would be any other department, the business entities, etc. And we would send them, they would be really representing the project outside of the IT departments. And again, the win-win situation I just talked about right before, it's they were feeling accountable, on board, responsible, and actively part of that project. And we would show, the project management team would show really trust toward them, and then they would really contribute to an effective communication. So again, this win-win situation. So yeah, that was a really great example of how the collaborative change and really relying on your internal staff as ambassador would be really successful. So if you want to move to the next one, Lavanya, now we want to ask you, how do you involve your people in your communications, and how do you give them the floor? So maybe you can take a minute to write down in your notebook or any sticky note you have, and then we're going to share, or you just raise your hand or put your microphone on, or you can drop your thought in the chat.
Blossom, while we're waiting for people to make their own thoughts about this, I was thinking about the fact that we are creating a guide for how all different partners within Idaho Partners for Good could contribute through content, so that it's not just channeled down one particular person talking about what our organization does, but we're going to actively encourage with boundaries, so everybody feels comfortable and safe on how to share, but that also allows them to share on our behalf.
Yeah, it's critical for the movement with Idaho Partners for Good that we do bring in content from different perspectives. It's exactly what this movement is meant to do, is to bring in diverse perspectives so we can get to different solutions. It is almost always a stronger, more long-term solution when you have diverse perspectives weighing in any organization. So thanks to Jillian, we are building out that brand voice and guide for our own organization, so that when people do want to contribute content for us, that they know what the we just give them the lane that they can be in, and then they feel safe writing for us, and we empower them to do it.
I see 2 comments in the chat box, and I can read them for you both. Jamie says she in a monthly internal email to circulate among departments, but also an internal team that works on complex issues to raise up to leadership areas that need addressed. And Johanna says that great examples, Lorraine. I can use these examples on my new role within my client.
Okay, excellent. Well, if you want to move on slides, Lavanya, we'll move on to the next topic that we're going to talk about. So the next one is making your values alive internally and externally. So I think, as I was describing the difference between brand and branding earlier, and I was talking about the fact that your brand are really the values that your business represents. I like to think about this with Simon Sinek's golden circle. He often talks about this from the perspective of leadership, but it works just as well with a business or organization. Your why informs how you do business and what you sell, or what you offer, depending on what your organization is, your products or your services. Your why really helps differentiate you, who you are in your industry. So, you might say, well, we're a business who've sold widgets for 100 years and we've always sold widgets and there's no why to it. That's just what we do. But I think if you really analyze what makes you different to your competitors, you have a space in your industry and you market what you do to a certain category of that industry. And there's a reason for that, which makes you different to everybody else. And if you can start with the inside of that circle and work out, it really can help understand what those values are. So values are easy to make up once a year and stick in your business plan, but I think what's important to understand is that values have consequences. If they're not really informing your business and how you live and work in your business, then what is the point of them? Will you hire and fire for them? Will you accept certain clients or vendors but not others because of them? And so that's the difference really between the culture of what actually happens and then the values and whether you live them. So I've put on here, which organization do you think these values are from? Communication, respect, integrity, and excellence. If you'd like to stick in the chat what your guesses are. I'm going to tell you it's not BP or Robinhood that are listed there, but does anyone have any guess of what large organization that might come from? Nearly every organization in the country I see, yeah, it could be probably. So those were the values that Enron put in their 2000 annual report. 2001, if you remember, is when Enron went into bankruptcy. So I think we now know that Enron was 100% not living those values, and they were not leading to consequences within their business or within their organization. There are 4 kind of types of values, and the most important one is the core values. So if you're trying to think, well, what should I describe as our values? What you want to go with are core values. Those are fundamental to you and your business, and they might be different for your business from somebody else's or your organization. So Robinhood is an example of this. For those of you who don't know Robinhood, I'll just tell you what their mission is to democratize finance for all. So that's a platform where they allow everyday investors or everyday people to get involved in investing at much smaller levels, in a way where the kind of traditional elite Wall Street type of trader used to feel very exclusive and only for that category. So they found a niche, an area within their industry that they felt needed served. I mean, their name talks to it. They're very clear in what their mission is. That mission would not be relevant to my business, or that value might not be relevant to your organization. So that's a fundamental value that they have. Now, the kind of debacle that happened in January, which most of you I'm sure know, but I'll give a very brief description, is that there was a large number of everyday small level investors who got together on a Reddit subthread and decided that they wanted to save the company GameStop, and they started to buy and sell those shares. And Robinhood actually came in and restricted trading of GameStop shares, which had financial implications for those small everyday investors that they claimed to be standing up for. And the feeling was that they threw those small everyday investors under the bus to protect the elite Wall Street traditional traders, and that they really did the very opposite of what their value said. Now, I'm not going to get into the logistics of whether they did the right thing or not, legally or ethically, but I think the reason why there was such a large backlash, and the reason why the investors felt so hurt to the point where they went to quite serious attempts to try and destroy Robinhood and their how people felt about them, is because they felt that value, and they felt like that had been lost in the process. They identified with that company and they traded with them because of that value and that feeling, and so they were very hurt when they felt that they lost as a result of that. So those are the kind of core values that you want. There are 3 other kinds, and ideally you don't necessarily want these to be in your kind of list of values that you're thinking about. One is aspirational, which is what you want your company to be. Maybe it isn't this right now, but you would really prefer it to be. And I think it's okay to have aspirational values as long as you're very clear that that's what they are. You're not currently living these values, but you would like to, because that has even bigger consequences. You're going to have to put a plan in place. You can't just say, I would like us to be like this. You have to put a plan in place and consequences which are going to lead you towards that value. So in 2010, at the time of the Deepwater Horizon spill, BP had a listed value of safety. Now, I don't know whether that was a core value that they failed at, or whether it was an aspirational value that they didn't work towards. But I think, just to give you a brief reminder, the Deepwater Horizon spill, over 5 million barrels of oil were spilled and 11 lives were lost. So it was a very, very serious incident. There was no one big thing that happened that caused it. It was a culmination of a variety of things. But the report afterwards talked about 3 main issues: poor risk management, last minute changes to plans, and insufficient training. So if you think if their value was safety, they were not living the consequence of that, because if they had, they would have done more training and not got to the job as fast, and they would have spent more money on that, or they wouldn't have allowed last minute changes without it going through an additional approval process. And one of the other things to really connect back to what Lorraine was saying was that if you live your values and your employees know what your values are, they should be able to point out to you that you're not living your values. So were there not BP employees who realized that safety was not was being impacted here? And if so, did they not feel safe to come forward and point out that that value was not being lived? So another example I have of this relatively recently was a company that was quite small, and they had stated that one of their values was work-life balance. That was a very important value to them. But as the company grew, they started to have more and more meetings that started at 6 p.m. It ran 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. And it became like an almost everyday thing. And the employees were able to get in touch with the higher up level and say, look, you can't tell us that work-life balance is important and expect us to be working till 7 p.m. every night. And so the company took that on board and made a rule, like, except for exceptional circumstances, we cannot schedule meetings past a certain time. And so that influence, not only having the values, but making your employees and your people aware of your values, means that they can check in with you and make sure that you're being held accountable, and that your entire system is working in the way that you want it to be. So the other values, just really quickly, one of them is pay to play, which is really just means like the minimum viable values, like you would fire an employee if they don't meet it. So you would like to think not doing something illegal might be one of those values, but I don't know, maybe Enron didn't have that as a pay to play value, so who knows where that sits. But I would argue that your list of values, your core values, shouldn't include pay to play, because those are just, if everyone in your industry should also have those values. And so like, don't say that you're honest, for example, because if you're not honest, if somebody else in your industry is not honest, that's a little odd. So we don't want those baseline, everybody just feels this way values. We need those kind of core ones that are unique to you. And then the last thing is accidental values. This is kind of an interesting one. There was a fashion company in San Francisco that started small, just with a couple of stores. And what happened at the very beginning was they employed young people in their 20s who were single, who went out at the weekends, who wore a lot of black. They had a very particular aesthetic. But as the company was growing, adding more and more stores, they kept employing people like that, because the people who were doing the hiring looked like that. Everybody in the store, when you went in to even think if you wanted to apply, also looked like that. And as the company started to get bigger and move out of San Francisco, the owners had to have a conversation with their employees and said, look, our values are trust. It's allowing ownership to our employees of their decisions. Our values do not include wearing black and being in your 20s. And we want to sell our products to moms with kids who don't necessarily look like you or dress like you or live like you, but they are having a hard time coming into the store because they feel like we have a value of being hip. And so they actually had to put policies in place and think about their hiring and talk about what values they wanted from their employees, so the people hiring understood what kind of values it was they wanted. When I think about diversity and equity, this really comes to mind, because if you say you have a value of diversity and equity, you really have to look and say, well, do we have an accidental value? That's something else, because we generally hire in our friends group and the people we know and the circles we know. And if you want to intentionally have diversity and equity there, you may have to put consequences of those values in place to make sure that you're hiring in a more diverse and equitable manner. So then if Lavanya, if you can move on to the next slide. Now we're at the conversation part, so I would really like you to take a note. First of all, it would be really interesting to me to know, does anybody know what their values of their organization actually are, or are they stuck away in a business plan somewhere? If you know, I'd love to hear if you know. If you don't know, do you want to have a guess at what your values might be? And is anyone willing to comment? Do they know of a kind of core value they have that they feel maybe represents their business in a way that really defines who they are? Okay, and then other thing to think about really is what do your values mean for your employees or for the people in your organizations? Do they know? Do you think they know what your values are? And do you feel like they could come to those higher up in your organization if they felt that you were not living your values and you were moving away from them?
There are a couple of comments in the chat. Lisetta says that I think this happens with the best of intentions, but love Adam Grant's discussion in this lane around culture add versus culture fit. And Blossom has talked about Idaho Partners for Good Values, which are continual learning, entrepreneurial mindsets, and design with the end user in mind. And Jamie talks about agility, dignity, collaboration. She says they are critical to our partner network, but can be interpreted differently by different departments and level of employees.
Yeah, I think these are all really good points. So I think when it comes to culture add versus culture fit, I think that's exactly what we're talking about with these kind of accidental values. I know that when I mentioned pay to play, the CEO of Zappos, for example, describes they have 10 values, and he describes them as committable. So he will say that even if an employee is working well, productively, if they don't fit the values, he will hire or fire on that basis. And when an employee starts, they have to sign up that they agree to the values. So they're given a list and they have to agree to them. So I think that's a level of, as you bring people in, are they fitting in with the values you've interpreted? But I also think really thinking about that internally, like who is doing the hiring, and do they know what your values are? Are they just hiring people like them that they think will get along in the culture, or are you looking at the values and saying, are these people going to fit well with the values that we have? So I think that's a fantastic point. And I think the idea that you can interpret differently at different departments is a really fundamental point. A value, to me, I see values like an umbrella. There's some overarching things above, and they can be interpreted differently by different audiences, by different employees, by different departments. And some of them will focus more on certain values than others, but everyone is under a common. It's often good why you might only have 2 or 3 values as well, for example, because everyone can sit under this common umbrella, but everyone can kind of interpret it differently.
Yeah, there's a question from Johanna, and she says, how many values are appropriate for an organization? And Blossom says that she loves the idea of having people sign off on the values when they are being onboarded.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, so the other really interesting thing about Zappos that I was reading the other day was that the CEO actually really didn't want values. He didn't want to write a list of values because he said that's just what people do because they feel like they have to and it doesn't mean anything. So he said he resisted it, and eventually the employees apparently said to him, we need a list of values. We need to understand what is the point of our brand. And the first thing he did apparently was say, okay, all of you email me and tell me what you think our values are. And then he collated it all together and figured out what he got from that. So that's a perfect example, as Lorraine mentioned, of bringing in your employees from the very beginning. But I think in terms of number, we can't say 3. 3 is the perfect answer, you know. But I think that it's whatever feels comfortable. So Zappos obviously have 10. That feels like a lot to me, because that feels like a lot for your employees to hold and keep in their head at one time. Somewhere like 3 to 5 feels comfortable to me. But obviously Zappos are very committed to those 10 values, and they live them and they're important to them. So I think it's however much makes sense for your organization, really.
There's a comment from Lisetta about resistance to change, and she says that her organization spent 18 months exploring what our values are and to create a new blueprint. And she says, so this conversation is really appropriate.
I think it's really easy to spend time thinking about it because you feel you have to, and then sticking them on the wall and then ignoring them. And I think that would be a big part of what Lorraine and I are saying today, is how can you incorporate your values from the beginning in your plans for your business, and then as you if you have to make change, I'm going to come to this at a later slide, but how do you translate that change or that crisis and use your values to do it?
Yeah. And Mindy says that values benefit best when they are part of the performance plan and having a consistent accountability.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly the bit where values have a consequence. There has to be a point, there has to be a consequence to them, which means that you're acting in certain ways in your business. And so putting them in performance plans, for example, is perfect. Yeah. I'm going to hand over now, Lavanya, if you want to move slides, and I'm going to let Lorraine take over for the next section.
Thank you, Jill. So the next section is be prepared and don't rush. So I'm going to make a reference to the very beginning in our introduction. Remember when we talk in our definition about change situation versus crisis situation? So I'm going to go over the two of them quickly. So as we said, for both of them, we can have a plan. So for any change situation, as we said, to go from A to B, we can have a change management plan to help people understand the why and actually contribute to the how, so that this change management support is really, there is no one fits all. It's really customized. It's really, even if there is a lot of methodologies, it's usually very customized and personalized for the situation. But it's really crucial to know how to think about how you're going to get your people on board to get to the point you want the company to be. And really contribute to that. And for, I'm going to stop for a minute on the crisis situation, because you can actually build a crisis plan before it actually happens. For example, you can identify the type of possible crises, which will be really related to your business or your environment. And with that, build the best and worst case scenarios. So you can't cover everything, but you will focus on really the most actually that have more chances, if I can say, to happen. Then you're going to set up the crisis team with your different people in the organization that will have for each of them a specific role in the crisis team, and and a definition of each of those roles, and a decision-making process where you will try to be shorter and quicker and more efficient than the usual one. If it's, I am more talking here about big organizations that can have pretty heavy standard validation process. Well, for this kind of crisis situation, you're going to have to find a way to go really quick and efficient. And then your whole chain of command identified. And then about communication, you can draw your layout and build your messaging about that. And important, identify and train the spokesperson. And if you, I would say also identify and know your stakeholders means, remember, every employee represent your company in the outside world, sorry. So regarding some key roles in the organization, you know that some people would be exposed more or less quickly to the outside world, and you would take care of them not personally, but I mean in particular. Then I would say don't rush. Even if today in our environments, everything is getting quicker and comes and goes so fast on social media and everything, we can see some kind of mistakes that have became pretty pretty viral on things like Twitter or so. I think speed is the enemy of communications, and that doesn't mean you have to wait days, but sometimes, taking a step back and think about it for a few hours and get the advices and validation needed will help you kind of save your communications. And I would add a best practice after a crisis is also assess the crisis situation and adapt in a continuous improvement mode. And this is all very practical and tactical, but of course, you want to consider the emotional part for the employees and for the customer. So transparency, humility, compassion, care. We can read, if you make a quick search, we can find a lot of example showing that most of the time the CEO or anybody up there of the company that is actually living the crisis would apologize and admit first. And it works pretty well toward the different audiences, and then quickly come back for another communication with actually an action plan and reassurance and everything. But the first step of apologizing and admitting what's happening usually really helps. I have a quick example about that. I have a few years of experience in the investment banking. Société Générale is the name of the French bank. And I joined it actually in 2008. And I don't know if you heard about that, but I joined them right after a huge fraud in the investment banking with the trader named Jérôme Kerviel, who tactically hacked the bank risk surveillance system and manipulating the software in order to take really risky position on derivative products. And he finally lost more than $7 billion. And so this created a crisis for years. And anyway, what I want to focus on today is I joined at that point, I joined the crisis team as a communication member. And they put everything in place. You have to remember that it's 2008, so anybody had a laptop to work from home or anything. And I can remember that we had so this crisis team identified, trained. We actually made practice 2 times a year, like fake crises. And we would be equipped with a whole bunch of documents that we had to have at home all the time. And then we had this kind of calculator that would generate a temporary access code to open your professional session from your personal computer. And we had all this crisis handbook with all the information needed, and we would know exactly what was the chain of communications and the chain of command for every single situation. And yeah, that was interesting to see it actually. So it was really interesting to be part of the training and the practice we had. We actually didn't need it in real while the time I was there. But see, it's a great example of an actually efficient, strong crisis plan. And at the same time, it's an example where they actually thought about it after a huge crisis, and they were not prepared for that one. So we can move to the conversation part. And I would be curious to know, you can move to the next slide, Lavanya. I would be curious to ask you when any kind of, I don't know, justice or food quality or bad reviews on social media or anything happen, ask yourself, take a minute to write down on your notebook and share with us right after. Do you have a plan? Do you have a crisis team? Do you have spokespersons identified? How would you react to a social media post? Do you have a process for that? So take a minute to think about it and feel free to share with us.
And while everybody is thinking about that and making notes, I just wanted to give the example that just happened. I don't know how many people heard about it on Twitter, of the cinnamon toast crunch shrimp debacle. So what happened was somebody on his second bowl of cinnamon toast crunch discovered something that looked like a toasted piece of shrimp tail. And he tweeted out a picture of it. And Cinnamon Toast Crunch, or General Mills, where the brand involved, dealt with it really badly. First of all, they denied it was shrimp, it was just a bit of sugar, which he got kind of upset about. And then a large number of people joined the conversation, and it got bigger and bigger. People were offering to do DNA analysis on it to find out if it was shrimp or not. There were people debating whether maybe rats had got into the flour and the rats had found the shrimp tails in an employee's like wastebasket and then had taken it back to their nest. So it went from being what could have been quite a small situation to blowing up on social media. And one of the questions that I'm going to ask on the next slide, but it's kind of relevant, is, you know, who actually is at the coalface when something arises? Do you want your person on Twitter to be handling your crisis communications? I'm going to guess, Lorraine, the answer to that is no.
Yeah, and I can do a quick rebound with another example of if I can say, preparation failure. I read about a Target data breach a few years ago, and it was actually shared by an IT security blogger. And I could see two problems in the Target response. First, that they responded so quickly that it was even before the management was fully aware of the scope and the cause. It was still investigating. And so they had to walk back later on some of their statement, which is a really good example of don't rush. And the second one is after that, they posted the CEO communication on the website where actually people were on social media waiting for answers. And so that's when you have a plan and you think about the channels and the audience you want to address to, that's where you don't make this kind of mistake of like wrong channel. So I can't see any other comment on that part on the chat. So I think we're gonna move on to the next part. Jill?
Okay, great. Lavanya, can you move the slide along for me, please? Thank you. So really, this is just kind of continuing what Lorraine had talked about, which is to build a consistent internal and external communication strategy. Your people are your first ambassadors, like Lorraine said, and your first audience. So if you think about it, your employees are on customer service, they're maybe on social media doing your tweets, they're answering your phones, maybe they're at people's houses. If news comes out on the media, the chances are that your employees or your people on the ground are the first who are going to be asked about it. So they should be your first audience when it comes to how you handle these things. And I think one of the reasons that we sometimes forget about that is that that allows you to keep control of the message. If you're able to connect back what you're doing and how to your values, and you can explain that to your employees, they don't need to parrot out exactly what you've said, but it means that they understand why you've done what you've done. So a quick example is Bird scooters, which we've had in Boise for a while, but during COVID, they had to make a lot of layoffs, as a lot of companies did. But what they did with 406 people was they got them onto a one-way Zoom call, and a voice just read a script that told them that their employment was terminated. While that happened, all their Slack channels and everything got cancelled. So obviously that was not a great way of handling it, but I think more importantly was how all the other employees felt about that. First of all, I don't know what Bird's values were, but I'm guessing it didn't involve respect and open communication with their employees. But those employees went to social media to talk about how unsafe they felt. Are they going to be in the next round of people who are going to get pulled onto one-way Zoom calls? So that kind of message came out through their employees who were scared for their own jobs. So when, as Lorraine mentioned, you have to think about who you want to be your spokesperson, but you also have to think about who in reality will be your spokesperson. So if you know that someone's going to ask your receptionist, someone on the phone, think about making sure they understand who the spokesperson is or who they should turn to if something feels, this sounds like a thing that's not supposed to be my responsibility. Who do they pass it to up the chain to make sure it goes to the right spokesperson? And I also think it's really important to keep an open line of communication if you can with your employees, like we have been saying. In crisis, you can't always do that, but the recent example again in COVID with Joann stores was that their employees were deemed essential workers at the very beginning of COVID. They were selling fabric for masks and so on. It makes sense. But there were these employees at their Colorado Springs store who felt very unsafe because of that. And instead of talking directly to the people higher up in Joann's, they held a protest outside the store. There was only 5 of them, but one of them brought their child, it got on the local news, and then it spread in the media. And after that, the higher up in Joanne decided that they would make the stores closed, that you could order online only, and then you could do pickup. But if there had felt like there was an open channel of communication for those employees to talk about that direct, we might never have heard about that because it wouldn't have had to go public for the change to get made. So is there an open line of communication where your employees can talk about whether they feel your values are being lived and whether there should be any changes to be made? So I guess it's really think about who are going to be your spokespeople and also how to make sure things get passed to them. Okay, I'm going to pass it on to Lorraine to finish up because our time is almost up.
Thank you. So you can go on the next one. It's kind of a quick summary of the four key points we went over. So it's kind of your takeaways. So remember, your people are your first ambassadors. Make your values alive internally and externally. Be prepared and don't rush. And then build a consistent internal, external communication strategy. And I would like just to make a quick rebound on James' comment. I'm sorry, I can see that in the chat that she had to drop off. So she talked about the feedback from the staff that is it was kind of a ritual in project or just the organization, I can't remember. And yeah, I would like to do a rebound on that because it's key in 2 points. I always like to include that in a communication plans for 2 reasons. For the communication itself, to have this regular feedback as a continuous improvement approach, to be sure that what we actually communicate, the way we do it, the channel we use, the people we talk to are really answering the needs, appropriate, regular enough, etc., to have their feedback on that. So really as a continuous improvement part in the communication plan. And the other thing is I like to put this feedback as almost as a channel, means that it has to be one of the way you actually get information, and then you're gonna what are you gonna do with this information. So that means that when we think about a communication plan, we have to think about what are we actually putting in place to get that feedback, in which ways we're going to get them, orally, by surveys, by, I don't know, polls anywhere, in events, in one-on-one or one-to-one, sorry. The ways you're going to get feedback, and then what actually consider them, because you know that if you want to ask people what they think about that, they have to see after that you actually consider what they said. So yeah, I wanted to make that quick rebound because this chat was comment was really interesting. And I'm going to hand over to
I think
Jill.
you want to move us on to the last slide, Lavanya, but that's us basically done. I don't want to hold everybody up anymore because I'm sure they have other things to move on to with their day, but thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. And if anyone wants to get in touch with Lorraine or I direct to ask more questions about this, we would be more than happy to talk to you, either through the Impact team, or if you have just individual quick questions you want to ask, then feel free to get in touch through Idaho Partners for Good, and we would be happy to talk to you. Thanks very much, Lavanya.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine. Thank you, Jill. This was absolutely wonderful. And I learned so much about values and crisis communication. And thank you to all of you who joined us today. At Idaho Partners for Good, we are all about harnessing purpose for greater impact. Come join us as we transform our communities for greater good. And we hope to see you next time. Thank you.
Okay.
I can see that we only have IP4G people now.
Yeah.
So we can debrief.
First of all, Mindy, your logo, I love.
I agree. I saw
Yeah.
social media. I really liked it too.
Yeah, that
Thank
logo
you.
that you have on when you're not on camera.
Yeah. Yeah, that's Brand Fruits did that for us, and it came out really well. Yeah, we love it.
Yeah, totally. I hadn't seen that before, so
Thank you.
that looks great.
Well,
Nice job.
you
Nice
ladies
job
have
on
a
that.
great day.
Okay,
Thanks, Mindy.
thank you,
Thanks for,
Mindy.
yeah, I was gonna say, great job. Chat soon later.
All righty. Okay, yeah, I thought you guys did excellent. The information was easily digestible. Not sure why there was not a lot, there wasn't a robust amount of interaction, which was a little surprising to me.
I
I think
agree.
it's just the numbers. I think when you only have, there was, other than us, there was only 9 people, and then so if you don't count Mindy, there's only 8 people. So I think it's sometimes it can be hard to share, personal examples of what your business did wrong in front of 7 other people from the community. So
Yeah, it's everything or nothing. Sometimes with our Boise change management group, when we have really small people, but we have some regulars too, so that helps. It can become a really active conversation, and then sometimes you have this black